Thank you. Director Wray, we know from the Arizona case, the Supreme Court said that state, local law enforcement were not to enforce immigration laws. But isn't it true that local and state law enforcement officers can enforce state and local law if, even if the defendant is in the country illegally?
Well, I want to be a little bit careful since the last time I looked at that issue was back in the 2001, 2, 3 range when I was a lawyer at the Justice Department. But
look,
my
time is very short. It's an easy question.
To yours. My recollection is similar to yours, but I'm not speaking as a lawyer right now.
Okay, it is the case, and I hope you'll refresh your recollection and your legal training. So it seems that since the federal government is welcoming, basically, by its tactics, by its handling of the massive surge across our border, in such a way to continue to encourage it, that there is massive destruction to landowners' property. It sounds like, understanding the criminal trespass laws of Texas, that perhaps landowners on the border ought to have no trespassing signs, including in Spanish, so that local law enforcement can protect the country while they're protecting the local property owners. There was a question about also the FISA court, and I'm still, as a former judge, particularly disturbed that no FISA judge felt strongly enough about people not lying in applications for warrants that they took action for contempt of court. But should DOJ officials that sign applications for warrants before the FISA court actually read them before they certify that they're true and correct?
Certainly, it's my practice when, as FBI director, I'm signing applications to.
You do read them.
I do review them. Yes, absolutely.
And I would commend you for that. And I would ask you to look into.
And they're not short, by the way.
Yeah, they're usually lengthy.
Yeah.
But I would commend your looking into Mr. Rosenstein's inability to testify that he actually read those regarding the Trump campaign before he signed them. The night before January 6th, January 5th, that evening I was talking to Capitol Police officers, and I said, you know, let's face it, most of the conservatives that come, they don't have any intention of being violent. And they said, well, we've been briefed today that there's a good bit of it's understood online activity, that there are people that are going to be coming that hate Trump, but they're going to dress up in red, MAGA, Trump paraphernalia to try to blend in and create trouble. We had Capitol Police Chief Son testify that they got no information from U.S. Intel or from the DOJ, FBI, of any threat of the nature that came about. Did the FBI have information about the violent threat that occurred on January 6th, on January 5th?
Well, the answer to that is complicated, unfortunately. So we've already talked about a little bit here this morning.
It shouldn't be complicated. You either had information or you didn't. That was my question.
So there's different kinds of information. We had the online chatter that we just talked about, and the so-called Norfolk SIR, Situational Information Report, has that. But what we did not have, to my knowledge—
Did you pass any of that information on to Chief Sund?
We passed the Norfolk information onto the Capitol Police in 3 different ways, as well as to
Okay.
UPD.
Well, you were careful to note that most of the protesters who were leftists last summer were basically peaceful, but you haven't said that about the 100, 200,000 people that showed up on January 6th. Do you know how many people actually came into the Capitol on January 6th that were unauthorized?
I don't have an exact number. I do know that we've now are approaching around 500 arrests. But to be clear, to your point about peaceful, the way I think is a fair description of January 6th is there's sort of three groups of people, almost like an inverse pyramid. First group, biggest number of people who showed up kind of outside, maybe not on the Capitol grounds, were peaceful, maybe rowdy, but peaceful protesters. Then there's a second group that were people who, for whatever reason, engaged in, let's say, the next level of criminal conduct, trespass, et cetera. And that is criminal, that is a violation, and those laws need to be enforced. And then there's the third group, which is where you're seeing a lot of the arrests and a lot of the more significant charges that are coming out of our work right now, which are the people who brought all sorts of weapons, Kevlar, tactical vests, bear spray.
Firearms?
What's that?
Anybody bring firearms?
Gentlemen,
I can think of at least one instance where there was an individual with a gun inside the Capitol, but for the most part, the weapons were weapons other than firearms. But there's three groups, and it's hard to paint with one broad brush every single individual.
the gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Cohen.
Mr. Cohen is on mute.
Mr. Cohen?
I'm unmuted now.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Wray. You've done an admirable job so far in foot soldiers in the January 6th insurrection. Kind of like going after Al Capone and getting all of the lottery sales tickets, the people that do the bootlegging in the street. You, to the best of my knowledge, haven't done anything to go after the people who incited the riot, the big bosses, the leaders, which is Donald Trump. Do you have any investigation or have you done anything to look into Trump's activities on the day of the insurrection, subpoena records of the White House, of phone calls in and out, and of meetings that he and Roger Stone and others may have had with leaders of these groups?
Well, again, Congressman, somewhat along the lines of something I said earlier, because we have not one, but now close to 500 pending criminal cases, all of which are in the hands of judges who feel very strongly about how much I discuss pending cases. I want to be careful about that. We have brought, in addition to what you're describing as kind of the lower level type offenses, we have now started to bring a number of conspiracy charges of various individuals. Yes, I think there's about 30 plus individuals who have been charged with conspiracy. Yes, sir. I
appreciate and understand that, but I'm talking about Mr. Big, number one. Have you gone after the people who incited the riot?
Well, I don't think it'd be appropriate for me to be discussing whether or not we are or aren't investigating specific individuals. I just don't think that's appropriate.
I'll accept that and understand that, but I would urge you to do it. He said, come to Washington on the day of the Electoral College, a month earlier, no other day. And he said, it will be big and it will be wild. I read that as violence to occur. And I was with a Capitol policeman on Sunday who said, yes, they had information that said it was going to be violent. You and the FBI did not make the case. You should have warned, and you had a duty to do that. Let me ask you this. Have you seen Mr. McGahn's testimony yet?
No, sir.
I urge you to look. I don't know if you can do anything without the direction of the Attorney General, but it appears Mr. McGahn was told to lie by the president about wanting to fire officials that would have resulted in obstruction of justice. I urge you to look at it. Can you act on that testimony independent of the Attorney General?
Well, I think we have very specific rules about predication and approval on certain kinds of investigations, so I'd have to look at whatever information you wanted to send our way, and we can take a look at the information and evaluate whether or not there's action we could take.
It's in the deposition, and it's clear that McGahn said that the president told him to lie, and the president also lied. I would urge you to look at that and talk to Director Garland, Attorney General Garland, about that. Did you infiltrate the crowds of the BLM Black Lives Matter protest in Washington when they were in Washington?
Congressman, we don't infiltrate protests as a general rule, certainly. When it comes to criminal activity, we have specific rules covered by the Attorney General guidelines and the so-called DIAG, which is our implementation of the Attorney General guidelines that cover what we can and cannot do. And we would have followed those scrupulously, not just in general, but in a specific period that you're talking about. We don't investigate First Amendment activity. We investigate threats of criminal activity.
Thank you, Director Wray. I know First Amendment activity is protected, but was your activities on January 6th different from what it was with Black Lives Matter? Did you observe? Did you try to get more knowledge about what was going on after you had the Norfolk information about the January 6th insurrection?
Well, the Norfolk information that we've talked about here arrived essentially the night before or the afternoon before January 6th and was promptly passed on. At that point, it was raw, unverified information that we hadn't yet had a chance to vet. But of course, we decided that even though it was raw and unverified, we needed to pass it on to all of our partners, both in the command post and throughout the Joint Terrorism Task Force, to make sure they had it.
Director Wray, thank you. I only have a few seconds left. You have compared ransomware to 9/11. Ransomware is awful and it's a problem. 9/11 was awful. But the insurrection on our Capitol, unlike anything known since the Civil War, is also awful. Where would you compare the insurrection? And would you admit that it was an insurrection on our Capitol with the assault on our country on January 11th?
The gentleman's time has expired. The witness may answer the question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, first, let me just say that I don't think any attack, ransomware or January 6th, can fairly be compared to the horror of September 11th and the 3,000 or so individuals who lost their lives that day. And that attack and my engagement with the victims in my last time in government was a big part of why I came back into this role in the first place. My reference to September 11th in context of ransomware was not about the attack, but about how the country came together in response. Now, certainly, when it comes to January 6th, it's a unique type of attack, not just in terms of the number of individuals, but in terms of the effort to disrupt a key part of our constitutional system and the peaceful transition of government, which is such a hallmark of our country. So it's a very significant attack in of its own right, and certainly we have, as we've already talked about, close to 500 arrests. We have all of our field offices fully engaged, and the amount of manpower